Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Magick Without Tears video. Today we're diving right into Chapter 6, the Three Schools of Magick, Part 1. I wanted to do a video covering basically all the three schools simultaneously. That was like a year and a half ago, but it ended up being so long that I postponed it, and that video is actually what partially prompted me to decide to go through this entire book. Now note, as tempting as it might be for me to pluck schools of thought, various traditions and orders, and draw off my own biases to label them under the three schools, I'm going to try to refrain from doing that as much as possible in this and the subsequent two videos. I'll simply analyze the source material, and then the listener can make their own conclusions about whether any tradition or order falls under a particular category. Also, I don't personally put too much stock into these ideas. Ultimately, I find them interesting, and I feel this is something that you have to know. You must know the different schools, but that's about it. I think it's less important than just doing your practices as a Thelemite and, ascending the tree of life, doing grade work, that whole spiel. Also, due to easy misinterpretations of these essays, I think it's way more divisive than productive. Besides that, Crowley never really uses these ideas save for once or twice. He does often refer to AA as the Great White Brotherhood, and those who fall prey to the abyss or their ego as Black Brothers. The latter are individuals, though I guess they could make friends and form a cult or be part of a defunct order which refuses to give up, even though its time has passed after their failures and of its remaining individual members, but we'll talk about that in its due place, and I'll cover Black Brothers in a future video in this book. With all of that said, let's begin. The first of these three essays begins by stating that all three are written by Gerard Ormond. I think it's possible Crowley edited them himself, probably changing a few ideas around. Others think Crowley wrote them, others think it was only Ormond and there was no edits by Crowley. Either way, Crowley used them as a response to Mackie, and they are what we have to work with, approved by Crowley, whether written by him or Ormond, or whether it was some kind of editorial collaboration. I'll link a bio about Ormond in the description below. Gerard Ormond opens up with a disclaimer that we are analyzing the ideological historical aspect of magic, and he thus describes this as, quote, the science of incommensurables, end quote. Incommensurables, that which, because it is unrelated, cannot be measured in comparison with something else. Quote, it is particularly to be noted that magic, so often mixed up in the popular idea of a religion, has nothing to do with it. It is, in fact, the exact opposite of religion. It is, even more than physical science, its irreconcilable enemy, end quote. I mean, to a great extent, I disagree that science and religion are opposites, as, in my opinion, they should go hand in hand, just as philosophy is simply another branch of knowledge with the same aims. They both aim to understand existence and purpose. Still, over the years, faith on superiors lording over the layman has really muddled the whole affair of religion in many parts of the world, so I can understand where the author is coming from. Physical science, I believe, has the exact aims of magic, right? But it is, of course, limited to strictly that which is physical and lacks the ability to ever analyze the origin of the universe, let alone to allow the individual to attain unity in the sense that magic does. Really, it doesn't allow anyone to understand the nothingness from whence all things came, because then there's nothing to measure and analyze. Magic transcends all of this, but I digress. Quote, the history of magic has never been seriously attempted. For one reason, only initiates pledged to secrecy know much about it. For another, every historian has been talking about some more or less conventional idea of magic, not of the thing itself. But magic has led the world from before the beginning of history, if only for the reason that magic has always been the mother of science. It is, therefore, of extreme importance that some effort should be made to understand something of the subject, and there is, therefore, no apology necessary for essaying this brief outline of its historical aspects." End quote. That above quote has some easy-to-chew arguments setting up the essay to analyze the schools of magic that have existed for an aeon, or an aeon of an aeon and an aeon. That magic itself has always existed, and there are schools who study what it is and how to use it. Also, that there have been almost no analyses of it from a strictly scholarly and historic perspective examining what it is and is not. The Golden Bow is probably still the best example, followed up by the Golden Dawn and then the Limerick schools. Crowley is, in my opinion, the best example. I'd say the Zohar has a lot of good points on this matter, if not that they decree against magic in Judaism while mussing up the whole thing with cultural mandates that only make sense to their own school and individuals based on culture, right? But the Zohar still has a lot of good magical points, even though Judaism is as a whole against magic. That is, unless, of course, they believe that what magic is being done is not being done by the individual, but rather through their monotheistic God. And that's more the exoteric interpretation anyway. So this essay continues, quote, "It is customary to describe these three schools as yellow, black, and white. The first thing necessary is to warn the reader that they must by no means be confounded with racial distinctions of color, and they correspond still less with conventional symbols such as yellow caps, yellow robes, black magic, white witchcraft, and the like. The danger is only the greater that these analogies are often as alluring as they prove on examination to be misleading." End quote. For that matter, the schools bearing a color are arbitrary. They could easily be red, blue, and yellow, the primary colors, or, black, white, and gray, even though that would then refer in most people's minds to white magic and black magic, which just really has nothing to do with. In truth, Crowley speaks of the Black Brothers and the magic of the Great White Brotherhood, or Magic of the Light, or Great White Brotherhood. But Black Brothers are altogether different from the Black School, though they may share some overlapping similarities. I don't recall him ever mentioning the Yellow School so much, save for one place, and that'll be quoted later on. There may be something in Moonchild, but it honestly escapes me. But it is in the Vision of the Voice. We'll get to that in a second. Quote, "These schools represent three perfectly distinct and contrary theories of the universe, and therefore practices of spiritual science. The magical formula of each is as precise as a theorem of trigonometry. Each assumes as fundamental a certain law of nature, and the subject is complicated by the fact that each school, in a certain sense, admits the formula of the other two. It merely regards them as in some way incomplete, secondary, or illusory." End quote. I wish it was as simple as one school being nihilistic, the next monotheistic, and the last dualistic. That would be great. That's definitely not the case, as the Lima, which I assume to be the white school of magic on the most part, even though Tomega Darion eventually says later on, we'll talk about it, that all three schools are really one. Right, and the Lima draws off of all three schools in certain ways. I think most systems, most magical traditions do so. This is talking more about individuals than it is necessarily a true one particular religion, but let's just say that the Lima, on the most part, is the white school of magic. So it follows the formula of 0 equals 2, as its view of the universe. So, it doesn't follow any of those three monotheistic, nihilistic, dualistic ideologies. Taoism is very yellow, promoting Wu Wei, or the way of no action. Quote, "The way never acts, but nothing is left undone," end quote, meaning as nature doesn't discriminate, it doesn't act, it just grows and flows. So their adepts align themselves with nature in that way. Taoism is also primarily nihilistic. There are various monotheistic religions, including Christianity and Buddhism, but Buddhism is more yellow, and perhaps the largest denominations of Christianity could be considered black schools of magic, especially for denouncing the flesh as evil, very focused on physicality in that sense. While some traditions of Christianity may be white, though it is perhaps hard to discern without very specific examples. Now, before anyone jumps at me, I know Buddhism doesn't have a central god to be worshipped, so I called it monotheistic. It has many deities, and I say monotheistic because it does have a source called nirvana, which is the limitless bank of energy and source of creation into which the enlightened go to be absorbed. And in my understanding of Buddhism, maybe I'm wrong, it's one of my weaker points, there is nothing beyond nirvana, and it's still a source, it's a thing, unlike a nothingness, right? So it's different than the zero in that sense. The three schools do align with the three gunas, however, the rajas, tamas, and sattva. The black, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, is most active and, for lack of a better term, destructive by action without deeper reflection. The yellow would be tamas, hesitant to act and in constant contemplation. The white, then, would be sattva, having a desire for deeper revelation, prompt and swift to act, while also taking time for contemplation of action. These are crude definitions, but we'll get into more nitty-gritty details later on. To continue, quote, "Now, as will be seen later, the yellow school stand aloof from the other two by the nature of its postulates. But the black school and the white are almost always more or less in active conflict, and it is because just at this moment that conflict is approaching a climax that it is necessary to write this essay. The adepts of the white school consider the present danger to mankind so great that they are prepared to abandon their traditional policy of silence in order to enlist in their ranks the profane of every nation." End quote. Really, that's referring very heavily to the Rosicrucians starting this whole process. Now we can get all metaphysical and say nothing happens by coincidence, right? That the secret chiefs propelled the happenstance of the Golden Dawn being formed by prompting somebody, whether intentionally or not, to carelessly leave papers in the Grand Lodge Library of England for Westcott to discover. But we could also look at events historically from a strictly mundane human perspective point of view. After the persecution of scientists and increase of education after the church eventually allowed reading and art that had nothing to do with Christianity anymore, you could now do art and read books that, of any genre. Well, education became more, and because the church eventually had much less power in the 17 and 1800s with this Enlightenment movement, the intrigue in the Rosicrucians was stronger than ever after the mainstream Freemasonry movement of that same 1700s period got steam. Anyone interested in the occult became fascinated with this inner order idea and secret chiefs who guide humanity in secrecy. Everybody wanted to be part of it. This shadowy order, this unknown brotherhood that might leave a pamphlet or some kind of breadcrumb trail, right? It became a big fascination. And that enthusiasm, coupled with the updates in technology to the printing press, only made making occult information readily available an inevitability. Now, with the internet, 100 and some odd years later, everything is published and available. So much so that everybody walking with a smartphone is literally walking around with an occult library in their pocket via Google. Right? Whether they search that or not, it's there on the internet in their pocket if they want to. Regardless, we do know that there have been many masters walking upon the face of the earth over the years, and the impacts they have made have shaped human consciousness. That when global crises arise, more masters incarnate to redirect the course of human destiny. Besides that, we will cover the chiefs in a future chapter more fully. Just adding that the Master Therion announced that the law is for all. The book of the law is written. It is yours to give to every man and woman and intermediate sex person whether to drink or to dine at them. Then they shall chance to abide in this bliss or no. It makes no difference. So that's why I say the Lima is a white brotherhood. It's very active in the sense there are instructions in the book of the law that you could take or leave at any given moment on how to spread the word of the Lima, and you don't have to force it on anybody. It's not what we do, but people could choose to take it or leave it. It's no longer something that is so secret, and it's something that's actively being done. In fact, in duty, it says it's the duty of every individual Thelemite to get other people to understand what doing their will means, because it makes life easier on the world in general. So far as the white and black schools fighting, I am going to venture and guess that Crowley liked this idea as an analogy for his conflicts with the Golden Dawn. Read the Confessions and Aleister Crowley in America to get a better idea on his beef with Mathers and the other members in France and England. Many have also used this analogy for the endless attacks of some orders within the Lemic schools today. And it's not to say a magician of the white school couldn't infiltrate the black school and inject their ideologies into it subversively. And likewise, for a magician of the black school, they could take white school ideologies and kind of twist them and, get their agenda done. That is possible. But I think it's best to just present you with the information. You could draw your own conclusions based on history and current events, whether any particular tradition, order, whatever, is of the white school, yellow school, or black school. Think about history in that context and what individuals are doing. Continuing, quote, "We are in possession of a certain mystical document which we may describe briefly for convenience sake, as an apocalypse of which we hold the keys, thanks to the intervention of the Master who has appeared at this grave conjuncture of fate. This document consists of a series of visions in which we hear the various intelligences whose nature it would be hard to define, but who are at the very least endowed with knowledge and power far beyond anything that we are accustomed to regard as proper to the human race. We must quote a passage from one of the most important of these documents. The doctrine is conveyed, as is customary among initiates, in the form of a parable." End quote. And that parable is from The Vision and the Voice, The Cry of the Sixth Ether. Quote, "And a voice cries, 'Cursed be he that shall uncover the nakedness of the Most High, for he is drunken upon the wine that is the blood of the adepts. And Babylon hath lulled him to sleep upon her breast, and she hath fled away, and left him naked, and she hath called her children together, saying, Come up with me, and let us make a mock of the nakedness of the Most High. And the first of the adepts covered his shame with a cloth, walking backwards, and was white. And the second of the adepts covered his shame with a cloth, walking sideways, and was yellow. And the third of the adepts made a mock of his nakedness, walking forwards, and was black. And these are the 3 great schools of the Magi, who are also the 3 Magi that journeyed unto Bethlehem. And because thou hast not wisdom, thou shalt not know which school prevaileth, or if the 3 schools be not one." End quote. Okay, this is coming from the book of Genesis, chapter 9. It's talking about Noah and his 3 sons, how one had seen the father naked, goes and tells the other 2. They come, and the other 2 come, walk backwards, and cover their father with the cloth without looking at him. I interpret this passage to be of profound magical potency of insight. The white school looks not on the shame of the holy men, knowing their body is human, and that they are a divine agent, and the human failings need be looked past, else one cannot see the forest for the trees. They see the divine, not just the human. The black school looks directly at the man and points out his failings as a means to denounce the divinity beyond the physical shell. The yellow school also does not look at the human, but remain indifferent to the divine in the moment, carrying the experience and any knowledge to be examined later when it may serve them or not. I'm sorry for using the word divine, which implies some creative intelligence, like a monotheist, I guess you would say. So replace divine and human with light and opaque shell if you prefer. Point is that any mind or body is going to have mistakes. It's imperfect in that sense, you think of body as like the body and mind as a technology of sorts. It's going to stumble. You're going to hit your toe as you walk once or twice in life, even after you've hit enlightenment. That's, it's part of human nature. There's pain and whatnot. But the Magus, through the Master, will use those failings, even their vices, to the service of the magic of light. Example, see, thousands of years later, and this drunkenness of Noah is being put to use by us Delamites via the vision of the voice, right? So these human failings, people's vices, they could still be of service to the white school, right? About the three schools being one, I take this simply to mean that all religions are one religion. They are all analyzing the same truth from different perspectives, and one must figure out exactly which school of thought they think is best to use for their own path based on their own nature. That is why I said earlier that these essays may be more divisive rather than productive because of ego. Going into a particular field of magical study and practice, that ego is going to think, this is the only way people should do this. This is what works for me, and clearly if it works for me, it has to work for everybody. And I mean, in many cases, that's just not so. People need to tailor fit things to themselves, right? Which I like the Lima because you could tailor to your own needs as opposed to other, let's just say, religious or magical traditions where it's this is how you behave, this is how you conduct yourself in all situations. Here's your cookie cutter, and you have to fit into this box, and there's less room for adaptation. Anyway, Almont notes about the passage, quote, roughly, it may be said that the white is pure mystic, whose attitude to God is one of reverence. The yellow school conceals the mysteries indeed, but examines them as it goes along. The black school is that of pure skepticism, end quote. Almont equates the black school with diabolism, worship of the devil in deed and ritual. We as Thelemites do not balk at Satanism, devil worship, and the like, but it should be noted that Thelema is not diabolical. Rather, it stands against the old Aeonic religious fields of thought, and you must understand Crowley's usage of these words like devil and Satan, etc. See, the devil in the tarot is the lord of matter, the physical world, and in most cases is simply a mutilated depiction of Pan. Satan, Crowley defines as any god who is against the God of the majority people, referring to, in most cases, the Abrahamic religions. Hadid and Ayahuasca are both identified with Satan in various of Crowley's writings. This being prompted by Librel, quote, ye are against the people, O my chosen, end quote. Thelemites also are not about hurting anyone or destroying nature or committing foul acts to damage anything without extreme conditions such as self-preservation and defense at hand. From here, the essay defines the yellow school and ends by quoting the Tao-Teh translated by Crowley. Quote, the yellow school of magic considers, with complete scientific and philosophical detachment, the fact of the universe as a fact. Being itself a part of that universe, it realizes its impotence to alter the totality in the smallest degree. To put it vulgarly, it does not try to raise itself from the ground by pulling at its socks. It therefore opposes to the current of phenomena no reaction, either of hatred or of sympathy. So far as it attempts to influence the course of events at all, it does so in the only intelligent way conceivable. It seeks to diminish internal friction. End quote. When I read these articles, I think especially of Lao Tzu's The Art of War. As the founder of Taoism, he advocates Wu Wei, along with brutal tactics in war, but only when necessary. Also, if you notice that ending sentence, it seeks to diminish internal friction. So, in the Lima, doing your will is going with your path. Trying not to do your will is to attempt to swerve off your course as a star, and that course is pulling you like a magnet whether you like it or not. And the more you try to resist that, think about something holding on so tightly while something else is pulling it. Eventually, that thing you're gonna break holding on. You know, if you're chained to something, right? If one arm is chained and you're holding on to a tree with the other, that chain is gonna pull your arm eventually, or you're gonna let go and you're gonna go with whatever is pulling you. So your course as a star is pulling you. So to attempt to swerve is to literally internally deteriorate due to that internal friction. This will being pulled in opposite directions. Back to the idea of the art of war. The idea of it is, if I could paraphrase a little bit, being that you do not start a war without need, and if an army, there is an idea directly in the passages of it, that if an army is retreating, you do not pursue them. Yeah, in this context, I think of Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield. For the yellow school, I mean, I said I wouldn't really talk about specific traditions, but, I mean, text kind of goes in this way, and I want to give some examples. I also think of Theosophy. They haven't had a full-on war with any other religion or occult order that I know of, although they have faced criticism from many external sources and dealt with such conflicts accordingly. Kind of just have their books and their temples, and they do what they do. You don't hear much drama about them, but they're also not very involved in shaping world events, you know? So much for not labeling any group under a specific school, huh? Despite all I said, it's always more complex than that, as there may be many individuals of any and all schools within any religion or even any order, but the main overarching philosophy and attitude which governs the yellow school, I believe, in my opinion, stands that it's, you know, and I agree with the author that, yeah, that makes sense for what the yellow is supposed to stand for. Further on the yellow, quote, "It remains therefore in a contemplative attitude. To use the terms of Western philosophy, there is in its attitude something of the stoicism of Zeno, or of the Pickwickianism, if I may use the term, of Epicurus. The ideal reaction to phenomena is that of perfect elasticity. It possesses something of the cold-bloodedness of mathematics, and for this reason it seems fair to say, for the purposes of elementary study, that Pythagoras is its most adequate exponent in European philosophy. Since the discovery of Asiatic thought in Europe, I'm thinking he means, but Asiatic thought, however, we have no need to take our ideas at second hand. The Yellow School of Magic possesses one perfect classic, the Tao-Teh King," end quote. Quote again, "It is impossible to find any religion which adequately represents the thought of this masterpiece. Not only its religion as such, repugnant to science and philosophy, but from the very nature of the tenets of the Yellow School, its adherents are not going to put themselves to any inconvenience for the enlightenment of a lot of people whom they consider to be hopeless fools. At the same time, the theory of religion as such, being a tissue of falsehood, the only real strength of any religion is derived from its pilferings of magical doctrine. And religious persons being by definition entirely unscrupulous, it follows that any given religion is likely to contain scraps of magical doctrine, filched more or less haphazardly from one school or the other as occasion serves," end quote. I believe the author is referring to scriptures such as the Bible, right? Predominantly when he's talking about religion. Quote, "Let the reader therefore beware most seriously of trying to get a grasp of this subject by means of siren analogies. Taoism has as little to do with the Tao-Teh King as the Catholic Church with the Gospel," end quote. I also think the author implies that religion is more for a group of followers, while magic is for the individual alone as a scientist, or, you know, an occult scientist, even if there is a school of students. So I think the argument is more like esoteric versus exoteric, right? Studying the deeper, unseen things as opposed to taking everything in a specific scripture literal, or, you know, applying all the cultural mandates to it so that a group of people who are not looking to actually reach some type of supreme enlightenment still feel they belong to that thing. From here, the essay quotes 7 verses from Crowley's translation of the Tao-Teh King, which he believes makes the doctrine of the Yellow School clear. I'll read these, but I'm basically not going to comment. You just listen along. So, chapter 10 of the Tao-Teh King, verse 3, "Here is the mystery of virtue. It createth all and nourisheth all, yet it doth not adhere to them. It operateth all, but it knoweth not of it, nor proclaimeth it. It directeth all, but without conscious control." Chapter 22, verse 2, "Therefore the sage concentrateth upon one will, and it is as a light to the whole world. Hiding himself he shineth, withdrawing himself he attracteth no notice. Humbling himself he gaineth force to achieve his will. Because he strive not, no man may contend against him. Chapter 43, verse 1. The softest substance hunteth down the hardest. The unsubstantial penetrateth where there is no opening. Here is the virtue of inertia. And verse 2 of that chapter. Few are they who attain, whose speech is silent, whose work is inertia. Verse 48, or chapter 48, verse 3. He who attracteth to himself all that is under heaven doth so without effort. He who maketh effort is not able to attract it. Verse 58, chapter 58, verse 3. The wise man is foursquare, and avoideth aggression. His corners do not injure others. He moveth in a straight line, and turneth not aside therefrom. He is brilliant, but doth not blind with his brightness. Chapter 63, verse 2. Do great things while they are yet small, hard things while they are yet easy. For all things, how great or hard soever, have a beginning when they are little and easy. So thus the wise man accomplisheth the greatest tasks without undertaking anything important. Chapter 76, verses 2, 3, and 4. So then rigidity and hardness are the stigmata of death, elasticity and adaptability of life. He then who putteth forth strength is not victorious, even as a strong tree filleth the embrace. Thus the hard and rigid have the inferior place, the soft and elastic the superior. Just not necessarily a comment on it, because that could take a lot of time, but there's a lot of like action through non-action, or begetting through non-action, withdrawing oneself, right? He is brilliant, but doth not blind with his brightness. So it's kind of like concealing yourself, humbling yourself, withdrawing more than actively, I'm going to go out and do, if you know what I mean. So that covered a great portion of the Yellow School. We'll pick up on this in a little bit. I have another video coming soon. Love is the law, love under will. I'll catch y'all on the next one.